The stars burned cold in the void as Calseth stared at his sensor display. Something was wrong. The young Valoran had been monitoring this sector for 3 years, and he knew every asteroid, every comet, every piece of space debris that drifted through the darkness. This was different. "Sir," he called out to Marshal Torvex, who stood on the command platform of the battleship Eternal Glory. "I'm detecting an anomaly at bearing 274. Torvex barely glanced up from his tactical display. The Valoran coalition had ruled this region of space for 3,000 years. Nothing surprised them anymore. They were the apex predators of the galaxy, the civilization that all others feared or served. "Define anomaly," Torvex said, his voice carrying the boredom of a commander who had seen everything. Calseth frowned at his instruments. "It's massive, sir. The size of a small moon. But, it's not registering properly. Our sensors keep sliding off it, like it's not really there." Now Torvex looked up. The Valoran fleet had technology that could detect a single fighter craft from 3 star systems away. Nothing could hide from them. "Run a full diagnostic on your station. It's probably just a sensor ghost." But, even as he spoke, Torvex felt something change in the air. The other bridge officers were turning to their displays, their expressions shifting from routine boredom to confusion. The ship's artificial intelligence began chirping warnings. Then, it appeared. One moment there was empty space. The next moment, something colossal materialized in the void like a nightmare taking physical form. The object was so large that the Eternal Glory's sensors struggled to capture its full dimensions. 12 kilometers long, shaped like a dagger designed by someone who understood that beauty and lethality were not opposites. The hull was dark, so dark it seemed to drink in the light of distant stars. Weapons bristled along its surface, but they were like nothing in the Valoran database. The ship sat there in perfect silence, its engines producing no visible exhaust, no radiation signature, nothing that would indicate how something so massive could move through space. "What is that?" Torvex whispered. For the first time in his long military career, he felt something he barely recognized. Fear. Calsetha's fingers danced across his console. "I don't know, sir. It's not in any of our records. The energy signature is completely unknown. And, sir, I think it's been scanning us this whole time." Torvex straightened, pushing down the fear and, replacing it with anger. The coalition did not tolerate disrespect. "Send the standard challenge. All frequencies." The communications officer transmitted the message that had been used for centuries. It demanded identification, stated the authority of the Valoran coalition, and required immediate compliance with their laws. It was a message that had brought thousands of species to their knees. Seconds passed. Then, minutes. The alien vessel remained silent. "They're ignoring us," Torvex said, his voice hardening. In Valoran culture, silence was contempt. To ignore a challenge was to declare oneself above the challenger. "Charge weapons. Fire a warning shot across their bow." The Eternal Glory's main plasma cannon hummed to life, gathering energy from the ship's core. The weapon could vaporize a small asteroid with a single shot. The bright blue bolt lanced out across the darkness, carefully aimed to pass within 100 meters of the alien vessel's nose. The plasma bolt vanished. It didn't explode or dissipate. It simply ceased to exist the moment it entered the space around the unknown ship, as if reality itself had swallowed it whole. Every Valoran on the bridge stood frozen. Their most powerful weapon had been negated without any visible effort. The alien ship hadn't even moved. Then, it spoke. A single word appeared on every display, transmitted on every frequency, perfectly translated into the Valoran language despite this being their first contact. The word appeared in text, but also echoed through the bridge speakers in a voice that was calm, measured, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Wait." Torvex felt his blood run cold. The ship had absorbed their attack, analyzed their language, and responded with perfect clarity. All in the span of heartbeats. What kind of intelligence were they dealing with? All ships, battle formation, Torvex ordered, his voice tight. Send a priority alert to Fleet Command. Tell them we have first contact with an unknown, extremely powerful vessel. Request immediate reinforcements. Around the Eternal Glory, the patrol fleet moved into position. 12 warships, each capable of reducing a planet's surface to molten glass. They formed a sphere around the alien vessel, weapons charged and ready. The alien ship did nothing. It just sat there in the void, silent and patient. Aboard the Silence of Terra, Commander Hyun studied the alien vessels surrounding his ship. The bridge was quiet, efficient, every officer focused on their task. The lighting was dim, the better to see the holographic displays that filled the air. Analysis, Mr. Day. Hyun asked his tactical officer. Lieutenant Day looked up from his station. Their weapons are plasma-based, probably magnetic containment systems. Impressive for their tech level, but nothing our shields can't handle indefinitely. I count 12 vessels in immediate vicinity, but sensor sweeps show approximately 300 more converging on this position. Hyun nodded. This was going exactly as the first contact protocols predicted. Humanity had learned hard lessons about meeting new species. Most civilizations in the galaxy were territorial, aggressive, and prone to viewing any unknown as a threat. The key was to appear strong enough that they would choose diplomacy over combat, but not so threatening that they would attack out of desperation. Ambassador Minji, how long until the translation algorithms are complete? A woman's voice came through the bridge speakers. Another 20 minutes, Commander. These aliens use a complex tonal language with multiple nested grammatical structures. I want to be absolutely certain we're not accidentally declaring war when we say hello. Take your time, Hyun said. Time is something we have plenty of. What he didn't say was that every passing minute made the aliens more nervous. Humans understood psychological warfare better than most species. Not because they were cruel, but because they had spent thousands of years fighting each other. They knew how fear worked, how uncertainty could be weaponized. The Silence of Terra was humanity's statement to the galaxy. It said, we are here, we are powerful, and you should think very carefully before you start something you cannot finish. But Hyun genuinely hoped for peace. Humanity had built these massive warships not for conquest, but for survival. The galaxy was vast and filled with dangers. Some of those dangers were hostile aliens. Others were far worse. The Titan-class vessels existed to ensure that humanity would never be vulnerable again. Sir, Day said quietly. The alien fleet is growing. We now have 47 vessels in weapons range, with more arriving every minute. They're taking up siege positions. Hyun studied the tactical display. The alien ships were beautiful in their own way, sleek and organic-looking compared to the brutal functionality of human design. But he could see the weapons, could calculate their firing solutions, could predict with near certainty what they would do next. They're going to attack, he said softly. They're working themselves up to it. They see our silence as weakness or contempt, depending on their cultural context. Should we withdraw? Day asked. Hyun shook his head. No. If we run, they'll chase us. They'll think we're afraid, and that will make them bolder. We stay. We finish the translation protocols. And, if they attack, we defend ourselves with minimal necessary force. And, if minimal force isn't enough to deter them? Hyun was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the growing alien fleet. Then, we show them why the Titan-class ships are called that. We show them why humanity decided that if we were going to explore the stars, we were going to do it with the biggest stick we could build. The bridge fell silent. Outside, in the cold void, 3 civilizations were about to collide. One ancient and arrogant, secure in their dominance. One young and cautious, scarred by hard lessons. And the galaxy itself, indifferent to them both, waiting to see which one would blink first. Ambassador Minji rubbed her tired eyes and stared at the linguistic analysis scrolling across her screen. 3 hours had passed since the silence of Terra had first appeared in Valoran space. 3 hours of tense silence while her team worked to decode an entirely new language. The aliens, whoever they were, had a communication system that relied heavily on context and tone. A single word could mean 5 different things depending on how it was spoken and what had been said before. It was beautiful in its complexity, but it made translation difficult. One wrong word and they could accidentally insult an entire civilization. "I think we've got it," her assistant, a young linguist named Suho, said. He looked exhausted. "The translation matrix is at 92% confidence. That's as good as we're going to get without actual conversation." Minji nodded. 92% was enough. She touched her communication panel. "Commander Hyun, we're ready to establish contact." On the bridge, Hyun straightened in his chair. Around them, the Valoran fleet had grown to over 300 vessels. They surrounded the silence in a massive sphere of firepower. Any one of those ships could probably damage a civilian vessel. All of them together might actually scratch the Titan-class warship's paint. "Open a channel, all frequencies," Hyun ordered. The communications officer nodded. "Channel open, sir." Minji took a deep breath and began the first contact protocol that humanity had developed after years of often violent encounters with alien species. "Greetings. We are representatives of humanity, from the planet Earth. We come in peace and seek only mutual understanding and beneficial trade relationships. We mean you no harm and request permission to establish formal diplomatic communications." The message was transmitted in the alien language, carefully constructed to be as non-threatening as possible. Then, they waited. Aboard the Eternal Glory, Torvex listened to the translation and felt his anger grow. The alien vessel had been studying them for hours, learning their language, analyzing their fleet. And now they spoke of peace. This was clearly a delaying tactic while they waited for their own reinforcements to arrive. War Speaker Nextar, the coalition's military representative, stepped forward. He was old, scarred from a dozen campaigns, and firmly believed that strength was the only language the galaxy truly understood. "They're lying, Marshal. Look at that vessel. That's not a merchant ship. That's not even a normal military vessel. That's a weapon designed to intimidate." Torvex wanted to disagree, but he couldn't. The alien ship was clearly built for war. Its every line spoke of violence held in check. "What do you suggest?" "We demand their immediate surrender," Nextar said. "We inform them that they have violated coalition space and must submit to our authority. If they refuse, we destroy them before their fleet arrives." "You think they have a fleet?" Kalseth asked nervously. The young sensor operator had been watching the alien vessel with growing dread. Something about it made his instincts scream danger. "Of course they have a fleet," Nextar said. "No species sends a single ship to make first contact unless that ship is expendable or unless it's a scout waiting for backup. Either way, we need to act now while we have numerical superiority." Torvex made his decision. The coalition had not survived for 3,000 years by being timid. "Open a response channel. I'll speak to them myself." The communication went out, translated by the coalition's own linguistic computers. "Unknown vessel, you have entered sovereign territory of the Valoran coalition without authorization. This is an act of aggression. You will power down all weapon systems and prepare to be boarded for inspection. You will provide complete technical specifications of your vessel and all data regarding your species, your home world, and your military capabilities. Failure to comply immediately will be considered an act of war." Minji listened to the translation with growing horror. Everything they had said about peace, about mutual understanding, had been completely ignored. Instead, the aliens were treating them like criminals or conquered peoples. "They want us to surrender?" Suho asked in disbelief. "Do they not understand what this ship is?" "They understand," Minji said quietly. "They just don't care. Or rather, they think we're bluffing. Commander Hyun, we have a problem." On the bridge, Hyun had already reached the same conclusion. He had encountered this kind of species before. They were apex predators in their region of space, so used to dominance that they couldn't conceive of being anything else. Reason wouldn't work with them. Not yet. Mr. Day, analysis of their demand. Day didn't even need to check his displays. They're trying to assert dominance, sir. Standard power play. They want us to bow before they'll even consider talking to us as equals. Can we bow? Hyun asked, though he already knew the answer. No, sir. If we show weakness now, we'll never be able to establish proper diplomatic relations. They'll see us as subjects, not partners. And, when they learn about our other colonies, they'll consider them legitimate targets. Hyun nodded slowly. This was the scenario that every human commander dreaded. First contact with a species that only understood strength. They couldn't surrender because that would mark humanity as prey. But, they couldn't attack because that would make humanity the aggressors. There was only one option left. Demonstration. Ambassador Minji, transmit the following message. Make sure the translation is perfect. I want no room for misunderstanding. Minji's fingers flew across her keyboard. Ready, Commander. Tell them this, we acknowledge your concern about unauthorized entry into your space. This was not intentional, and we apologize for any misunderstanding. However, we are a sovereign species and will not submit to boarding or surrender our technical specifications. We are willing to withdraw from your space and establish a neutral meeting ground for proper diplomatic negotiations. This is our first and only peaceful offer. The message was sent. On the Valoran side, Torvex read it and felt his rage crystallize into certainty. The aliens were refusing. They were apologizing with one breath and defying the coalition with the next. This was intolerable. They think there are equals, Nextar said, his voice dripping with contempt. They think that one ship, no matter how large, gives them the right to negotiate with the coalition. We need to teach them the reality of their situation. Torvex looked at the tactical display. 300 of his ships surrounded the single alien vessel. Even if it was as powerful as it appeared, 300 ships should be more than enough. And, if they waited any longer, the aliens might receive reinforcements. All ships, this is Marshal Torvex. The unknown vessel has refused lawful orders and has demonstrated hostile intent. We will disable their vessel and take their crew into custody. All ships, open fire. Target their engines and weapon systems. Try not to destroy them completely. We want prisoners for interrogation. 300 Valoran warships charged their weapons simultaneously. The space around them lit up with gathering energy. Plasma cannons heated, missile tubes loaded, rail guns powered up their magnetic coils. On the silence of Terra, alarm klaxons began to sound. Multiple weapons lock, Day reported calmly. 317 distinct targeting solutions. They're aiming for our engines and weapons arrays. Estimate time to firing, 15 seconds. Captain Jaiwan's voice came through from the escort carrier Horizon's Edge, which had been hanging back at maximum sensor range. Commander Hyun, we're detecting massive energy buildup from the alien fleet. Recommend immediate evasive action. Hyun sat perfectly still in his command chair. His face showed no emotion, but, inside, he felt a deep sadness. They had tried peace. They had offered compromise. And, it hadn't been enough. All hands, battle stations. Shields to maximum. Engineering, I want full power to the defensive grid. Weapons, stand by but, do not return fire without my direct order. Sir, Day said, they're going to hit us with everything they have. I know, Lieutenant. Let them. They need to understand what they're dealing with. Sometimes the only way to achieve peace is to prove that war would be pointless. The countdown reached 0. 300 Valoran warships opened fire in perfect synchronization. The void filled with deadly light as plasma bolts, kinetic rounds, and antimatter-tipped missiles converged on the human vessel from every direction. The barrage was enough to vaporize a small planet. It was enough to crack open a moon. It was the concentrated firepower of an empire that had conquered hundreds of worlds. And it all vanished against the shields of the silence of terror like waves breaking against an ancient cliff face. The weapon's fire continued for 10 full minutes. Calseth watched his sensors in growing disbelief as the alien vessel simply absorbed everything the coalition fleet threw at it. Plasma bolts that could melt through 3 meters of armor plating vanished without leaving a mark. Missiles that could level cities detonated against invisible barriers and accomplished nothing. Kinetic rounds moving at relativistic speeds hit something they couldn't penetrate and ricocheted off into space. "It's impossible," Calseth whispered. "No shield technology can do this. Nothing can just absorb this much energy." Marshal Torvex watched the display with growing horror. He had committed his entire fleet to this attack. They were cycling their weapons as fast as the cooling systems would allow, pouring gigawatts of destructive power at a single target. And they weren't even making it move. "All ships, cease fire," he ordered. His voice was hoarse. The bridge had grown hot from all the waste heat their own weapons were generating. "Cease fire immediately." The barrage stopped. In the sudden silence, Calseth ran a sensor sweep of the alien vessel. "Sir, I'm reading 0 damage. Not even surface scoring. It's like we never fired at all." Nexstar slammed his fist against a console. "This is impossible. No species has shields like that. Even the ancient civilizations in the core systems can't just absorb that much punishment without taking damage." Then, the alien vessel moved. It had been sitting motionless throughout the entire attack, apparently content to let the Valorans exhaust themselves. Now it rotated with slow, deliberate grace. The movement was ponderous, almost gentle, like a great beast deciding where to place its attention. The rotation brought the vessel's main weapon to bear. Not aimed at the fleet, but at something much farther away. The fourth planet in this system had 3 moons. One was inhabited by a small Valoran mining colony. The other 2 were dead rocks, useful only for their mineral content. The alien ship aimed at the smallest moon, a barren sphere of rock and ice that orbited far from the inhabited one. "What are they doing?" Torvex asked. "There's nothing there. It's just an empty moon." Aboard the Silence of Terra, Commander Hyun made the hardest decision of his career. They had shown restraint. They had absorbed an attack that would have destroyed any normal vessel. Now they needed to demonstrate why attacking humanity was a mistake that should never be repeated. "Mr. Taeyang," Hyun said to his weapons officer. "Target the uninhabited moon at coordinates 479. Gravitic lance, 30% power. Fire when ready." Gunnery Officer Taeyang's hands moved across his console with practiced ease. Target locked. Gravitic lance charging. 30% power confirmed. Firing in 3, 2, 1. The Silence of Terra unleashed a weapon that humanity had developed after studying the fundamental forces of the universe for 200 years. The gravitic lance didn't fire a projectile or a beam of energy in the traditional sense. Instead, it manipulated spacetime itself, creating a focused wave of gravitational distortion that traveled at the speed of light. The moon was 3 million kilometers away. The weapon reached it in 10 seconds. What happened next would be recorded in the logs of 317 Valoran vessels and studied by their scientists for generations. The moon didn't explode. It didn't shatter into pieces. It simply ceased to exist. The gravitational manipulation tore apart the fundamental forces holding the moon's atoms together. Matter was converted to energy so quickly and so completely that it left no debris, no fragments, nothing but a brief flash of radiation that faded almost instantly. Where there had been a celestial body 1.4 kilometers in diameter, there was now empty space. Not even dust remained. Every sensor on every Valoran ship registered the same impossible reading. The moon was simply gone, erased from existence as if it had never been. The bridge of the eternal glory was absolutely silent. Calseth stared at his display, his hands shaking. The energy readings from that single shot were beyond anything he had ever imagined. If the aliens had aimed that weapon at his ship, at the fleet, at the inhabited moon, at the planet itself, the result would have been the same. Total annihilation. Torvex felt something break inside him. Not his courage, but his certainty. For 3,000 years, the Coalition had been the supreme power in this region. They had never encountered a species that could challenge them. Now, in the space of minutes, that entire worldview had shattered like glass. The alien ship transmitted again. This time it was the female voice, the one they had heard before, the one that had offered peace. That was 30% power, Ambassador Minji said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried a weight that made every Valoran on every ship listen with absolute attention. At full power, we can do that to a star. We have 12 of these ships. We did not come to your space to conquer or destroy. We came seeking peaceful contact and mutual cooperation. We still want that peace. She paused, and, when she spoke again, her voice was harder. But, understand this, humanity will not be conquered. We will not surrender. We will not bow. If you force us to fight, we will fight. And, if we fight to ensure that our enemy never threatens us again. This is not a boast. It is a simple statement of fact. The transmission ended. The silence of terror rotated back to its original position and, simply waited, its weapons powered down, its shield still active. Nextar looked at Marshal Torvex with desperate eyes. We have to do something. We can't let them just sit there after such a demonstration. The entire coalition will see this as weakness. But, Torvex was staring at the empty space where a moon had been moments before. He was thinking about the populated moon nearby, about the 100,000 Valorans living there in the mining colony. He was thinking about what would have happened if the aliens had targeted that moon instead. He was thinking about his home world, about his family, about everything he had spent his life protecting. No, he said quietly. We need to talk to them. We need to understand what we're dealing with. And, we need to do it before someone does something that gets us all killed. On the silence of Terra, Chief Engineer Yuna monitored the ship's power systems. The gravitic lance had drawn enormous energy from the ship's fusion cores, but they were already back to full capacity. The shields had absorbed the Valoran attack without even straining the generators. The ship could fight at this level for days if necessary. But, Yuna hoped it wouldn't be necessary. She had helped build the Titan-class vessels, had poured years of her life into making them the most powerful warships humanity could construct. She had done it because she remembered the Devourer attack on the colony world where she had grown up. She remembered watching from orbit as machines from the dark between stars descended on her home and began systematically exterminating every living thing they found. The Titan-class ships existed so that would never happen again. But, Yuna had never wanted to use them against other living beings. The Devourers were machines, ancient and merciless. These Valorans were people, just like humanity. They had families, hopes, dreams, fears. Engineering to bridge, she said. Commander Hyun, request permission to power down the lance. We've made our point. Hyun's response came immediately. Granted. Power down all offensive systems but, keep the shields at maximum. I want to show them we're not a threat unless they force us to be. Throughout the human fleet, similar conversations were happening. Captain Jaiwan aboard the Horizon's Edge was talking to her pilots, explaining why they had held back during the attack. Young pilot Suho was checking his fighter's systems and, hoping he wouldn't have to launch. Every human present understood what they had just witnessed. They had crossed a line. They had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of, and, there was no taking that back. But, they had also shown restraint. They could have destroyed the Valoran fleet in seconds. They could have aimed at the populated moon, at the planet, at the shipyards they had detected on the system's outer edge. They could have slaughtered millions with a single shot. Instead, they had destroyed an empty rock and, offered peace again. Lieutenant Day watched the Valoran fleet's formations on his tactical display. The ships were pulling back slightly, creating more distance between themselves and the silence. Good. That meant they were thinking, re-evaluating, hopefully considering the diplomatic option. Sir, Day said to Commander Hyun. The alien fleet is holding position at 10,000 kilometers. They're not powering weapons, but they're not withdrawing either. Hyun nodded. They're waiting for orders from their leadership. We've upset their entire understanding of the galaxy. That takes time to process. Ambassador Minji, prepare a more detailed diplomatic proposal. I think they're ready to listen now. Minji was already working on it. She knew what humanity was offering. Not submission, not conquest, but something the galaxy seemed to have forgotten was possible. Partnership between equals. Mutual defense. Shared knowledge. A chance to stand together against the real dangers lurking in the dark spaces between stars. She just hoped the Valorans would be wise enough to take it. 3 days after the demonstration, a hastily constructed space station hung in neutral territory between human and Valoran space. It was a simple structure, built by automated drones from both civilizations working side by side. Inside was a single large conference room with atmosphere compatible with both species. Ambassador Minji sat across from Marshal Torvex and a delegation of Valoran leaders. Between them was a holographic display showing real-time translations of their conversation. After 3 days of careful communication, both sides had refined their translation algorithms to near perfection. Torvex looked older than he had during the first encounter. The weight of what he had witnessed seemed to have aged him years in mere days. We need to understand, he said, his voice carrying none of its earlier arrogance. How did your species develop such weapons? Our intelligence services monitor thousands of species across hundreds of sectors. We should have known about you. Minji took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been preparing for. The truth is, Marshal, humanity is young. We only achieved faster-than-light travel 40 years ago. Before that, we had no idea other species existed. We thought we were alone in the universe. A Valoran scientist named Velmore leaned forward. Impossible. Our own species took 3,000 years to go from Industrial Revolution to FTL capability. How could you accomplish it in a fraction of that time? Because we almost destroyed ourselves, Minji said quietly. She gestured to the holographic display, which began showing images from Earth's history. My species has always been violent. We spent thousands of years fighting each other. Tribes fought tribes. Nations fought nations. We developed weapons that could level cities, then, weapons that could scorch entire continents. By the year 2000 in our calendar, we had enough nuclear weapons to make our home world uninhabitable. The Valorans watched in growing horror as the display showed mushroom clouds, devastated cities, and casualty numbers that reached into the tens of millions. You attacked yourselves with weapons like that? Velmore asked in disbelief. Twice, Commander Hyun said. He had joined the meeting to provide the military perspective. We used nuclear weapons on each other in a war that killed 50 million people. And that taught us a lesson we never forgot. We learned that weapons of total destruction don't make you safe. They make you vulnerable, because eventually someone will use them. Dr. Hannah, the human xenoanthropologist, took over the presentation. But, we also learned something else. We learned that diversity makes us stronger. Earth has thousands of different cultures, hundreds of languages, countless ways of thinking and living. We fought for centuries before we finally understood that our differences were valuable, not something to be eliminated. What does this have to do with your weapons? Torvex asked. Everything, Hannah said. When we finally achieved FTL travel, we were cautious. We sent out small exploration ships, careful not to attract attention. And then, we met our first hostile aliens. A species that saw us as prey, as resources to be harvested. They attacked one of our colonies. 8,000 people died before we could evacuate. The holographic display showed the aftermath. Burning buildings, bodies in the streets, a world left devastated. That colony was called New Hope, Minji said softly. It was where my parents lived. I watched from orbit as the attack happened. I was on a supply ship, and there was nothing we could do. Our weapons couldn't even scratch the alien vessels. After that, Hyun continued, humanity made a decision. Never again. We would never again be helpless while our people died. We poured everything we had into developing defensive technology. We studied the aliens who attacked us, reverse-engineered what we could, and, then, we innovated. We humans are very good at innovation, especially when we're afraid. Velmore studied the data streaming across his personal display. Your FTL technology is completely different from ours. You don't use hyperspace lanes. You're actually tearing holes in reality itself. Yes, Dr. Hannah confirmed. Most species in the galaxy discovered FTL by finding natural hyperspace currents and learning to navigate them. We didn't have that luxury. We were isolated, alone, with no one to teach us. So we had to develop our own method. It turns out that if you're desperate enough and reckless enough, you can brute force your way through the barriers other species consider absolute. That's insane, Torvex said. The energy requirements alone should be impossible. We're very good at generating energy, Hyun said with a slight smile. We've been splitting atoms for over 400 years. We've been fusing them for 300. And we've been desperately trying not to blow ourselves up with that power for just as long. That desperation taught us how to manage enormous amounts of energy safely. Ambassador Minji brought up new data. Marshall, we're not telling you this to frighten you. We're telling you because we want you to understand where humanity comes from. We're a young species with an old talent for war. But, we've also learned the cost of that war. We've seen what happens when strength is used for domination instead of protection. She showed them images of Earth's colonial period, when powerful nations had conquered weaker ones. Our own history is full of empires that thought their strength gave them the right to rule others. Every one of those empires eventually fell, destroyed by the resentment and resistance of the people they tried to dominate. We remember those lessons. Torvex was quiet for a long moment. So when you say you don't want to conquer us, you actually mean it. Yes, Minji said firmly. We've learned that domination breeds rebellion. We've learned that forcing our culture on others eventually destroys both the conquerors and the conquered. We want partners, not subjects. We want to learn from other species, not control them. Nextar, who had been silent until now, finally, spoke. But, you have the power to conquer us. You've proven that. Why should we believe you'll restrain yourselves? Commander Hyun met the warspeaker's eyes. Because we know what happens when we don't. We know what it's like to be conquered, to have someone else's laws forced on us, to watch our culture being destroyed by those who think their way is the only way. Many of our nations suffered under colonial rule. We remember what that felt like. We will never do to others what was done to us. There's another reason, Dr. Hannah added. The galaxy is more dangerous than you realize. The species that attacked New Hope, the ones who killed my parents, they weren't unique. We've encountered 3 other hostile civilizations since then. And we found evidence of something worse. Something that makes all of us, humans and Valorans alike, look like children playing with toys. The holographic display changed to show sensor data from deep space. Strange energy signatures, patterns of destruction that spanned light years. We call them the Devourers, Hannah said. They're ancient, probably millions of years old. They're not alive in any sense we understand. They're machines, artificial intelligences that were built by some long-dead civilization. And, their only purpose seems to be consuming everything they encounter. Velmore studied the data with growing alarm. These readings are impossible. Nothing could generate this much energy. Nothing could move this fast. That's what we thought too, Hyun said. Until we encountered them directly. They attacked one of our survey ships 2 years ago. The ship barely escaped, but we got enough data to understand what we're facing. The Devourers are not interested in negotiation or coexistence. They simply consume planets, stars, entire civilizations. They break everything down to its component atoms and use it to build more of themselves. Why haven't we encountered them? Torvex asked. The Coalition has explored this region for thousands of years. Because you've been lucky, Minji said. The Devourers move slowly, taking centuries to cross the space between star systems. But, they're coming this way. Our long-range sensors have tracked their movement patterns. In approximately 300 years, they'll reach the edge of Valoran space. The silence in the conference room was absolute. 300 years seemed like a long time, but, for civilizations that thought in terms of millennia, it was practically tomorrow. The Titan-class ships weren't built to conquer you, Hyun said quietly. They were built to fight the Devourers. They were built to protect humanity from threats that conventional weapons can't touch. And, if you're willing to work with us, they can protect you too. Torvex looked at his fellow Valorans. He saw the same realization in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. The galaxy was not what they thought it was. They were not the apex predators they had believed themselves to be. They were simply one more species struggling to survive in a universe that was vast, dangerous, and utterly indifferent to their fate. What are you proposing? He asked Ambassador Minji. Minji smiled. It was a tired smile, but also hopeful. An alliance. Mutual defense, shared technology, cultural exchange. We share what we've learned about the Devourers and other threats. You share your knowledge of this region of space and the species within it. Together, we build a network of civilizations that can stand against the darkness. And, if we refuse? Nexstar asked. Then, we part as neighbors, Minji said simply. We'll maintain our borders, respect your territory, and wish you well. But, we won't leave you defenseless. If the Devourers come, we'll fight them whether you join us or not. Because that's what humanity does. We protect the innocent, even from those who were once our enemies. Torvex stood slowly. He walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars. I need to consult with the Coalition Council. This is too large a decision for one marshal to make. But, I'll tell you this, Ambassador. 3 days ago, I thought your species was a threat to be eliminated. Today, I'm beginning to think you might be exactly what the galaxy needs. 3 months after first contact, the Treaty of Distant Stars was signed in a ceremony broadcast to both human and Valoran worlds. Marshal Torvex and Ambassador Minji placed their marks on the document, officially recognizing each other's sovereignty and establishing mutual defense protocols. It was a moment that would be remembered for generations. But, the real work was only beginning. Commander Hyun stood in the training center aboard the joint military station that had been constructed at the border between the two civilizations. Before him were 30 Valoran officers, the best and brightest of their fleet, chosen to learn human combat tactics. They looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Good morning, Hyun said through the translation device. Over the next 3 months, we're going to teach you how humans fight. I need to warn you, many of the things we do will seem reckless or even insane by Valoran standards. That's because they are. Humans don't fight the way most species do. We don't fight to win territory or to prove dominance. We fight to survive, and we're willing to take risks that would terrify other species. One of the Valoran officers, a young commander named Rixval, raised his hand. With respect, Commander, we've seen what your ships can do. Why do we need to learn tactics when you have such powerful weapons? Hyun smiled. Because weapons are just tools. It's how you use them that matters. Let me show you something. He activated a holographic display showing a battle from human history. This is the Battle of Thermopylae, fought on Earth over 3,000 years ago. 300 soldiers held a narrow pass against an army of over 100,000. They knew they couldn't win. They knew they were going to die. But, they fought anyway, because their sacrifice gave their people time to prepare. The Valorans watched in silence as the simulation played out. The 300 warriors fought with desperate courage, holding their position for 3 days before they were finally overwhelmed. The larger army won, but at such great cost that they were weakened for the rest of the campaign. "That's insane," Rixval said quietly. "Why would anyone accept certain death like that?" "Because sometimes sacrifice is necessary," Hyun said. "Because sometimes the mission is more important than individual survival. That's the first lesson of human warfare. We're willing to die if it means protecting those who come after us." Lieutenant Day, who was assisting with the training, brought up another example. "This is more recent. The defense of New Hope, the colony I mentioned before. We had 3 small patrol ships against 7 alien raiders. We were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and had no chance of winning. But we attacked anyway, buying time for the civilian transports to escape. 2 of our ships were destroyed. The third was so damaged it could barely fly. But we saved 8,000 people before the main attack began." "You attacked knowing you would lose?" another Valoran officer asked. "We attacked knowing we might lose," Day corrected. "There's a difference. Humans are eternal optimists. We always think we might find a way, some trick or tactic that will turn the tide. Sometimes we're right. Sometimes we die trying. But we always try." The training continued for weeks. The Valorans learned about human tactics, close-range combat that most species avoided, boarding actions that put soldiers directly at risk, weapons that could cause mutual destruction if used incorrectly. They learned about human logistics, the complex supply chains that kept human fleets operating far from home. They learned about human morale, the intangible force that kept soldiers fighting even when logic said they should retreat. But, most importantly, they learned about human stubbornness. Humans simply didn't know when to quit. They would keep fighting long past the point where other species would surrender. They would find ways to win battles that should have been unwinnable. And, if they couldn't win, they would make sure their enemy paid such a high price for victory that it would become defeat. "It's the death world factor," Dr. Hannah explained during one of her lectures on human psychology. "Earth is what we call a death world. Heavy gravity, violent weather, dangerous predators, diseases that can kill in hours. Humans evolved in an environment that was constantly trying to kill them. It made us tough, adaptable, and very, very stubborn. We don't give up because we never could. Giving up on Earth meant death." On the human side, officers were learning about Valoran culture and tactics as well. Captain Jaiwan was attending diplomatic sessions, learning the complex social hierarchies that govern Valoran society. It was fascinating in its own way. The Valorans had built their civilization on principles of order and efficiency. Every member of their society had a place, a role to fulfill. It was completely different from human chaos, but it worked for them. "They're not evil," Jaiwan explained to her pilots during a briefing. "They're just different. They see the universe as something to be organized and controlled. We see it as something to be explored and adapted to. Neither approach is wrong. They're just different paths to the same goal, survival." Young pilot Suho was part of a cultural exchange program, spending time aboard Valoran vessels and learning their way of life. It was strange at first. The Valorans were so orderly, so precise in everything they did. But he came to appreciate it. Their efficiency meant nothing was wasted, no effort was unnecessary. It was a good complement to human creativity and adaptability. Then came the test neither side had wanted but both had prepared for. Long-range sensors detected a Devourer scout fleet entering the outer edge of Valoran space. 3 mechanical vessels, each the size of a small moon, moving slowly but inexorably toward populated systems. The Valoran fleet responded immediately, sending 3 of their largest battle groups to intercept. They were confident. They had learned from the humans, had upgraded their weapons and tactics. They thought they were ready. They were wrong. The first battle group engaged the Devourers at maximum range. Plasma bolts and missiles streaked across space, striking the mechanical vessels. The Devourers absorbed the damage without slowing. Then, they returned fire with weapons that bent reality itself, creating fields of twisted spacetime that tore Valoran ships apart atom by atom. 30 ships were destroyed in the first exchange. The survivors retreated in panic, transmitting desperate requests for aid. The second and third battle groups fared no better. The Devourers were simply operating on a different level of technology, weapons and defenses that seemed to ignore the laws of physics that governed normal matter. Marshal Torvex, commanding the defense from his flagship, made the hardest decision of his life. He sent a message to the humans. A single word that acknowledged everything that had changed between their species: help. The silence of Terra and two of her sister ships, the Thunder's voice and final answer, entered Valoran space traveling at speeds that should have torn normal vessels apart. They had been stationed nearby, waiting for this exact scenario. Commander Hyun had known the Devourers would come. It was only a question of when. All ships, this is Commander Hyun. We are here to honor our alliance with the Valoran coalition. We will not allow the Devourers to take innocent lives while we have the power to stop them. All vessels, engage at will. Remember your training. These things don't surrender, don't negotiate, don't retreat. We destroy them completely or we die trying. The 3 Titan-class warships moved into formation and opened fire. Gravitic lances tore through space, striking the Devourer vessels with the force of collapsing stars. The mechanical ships tried to adapt, tried to absorb the damage as they had absorbed the Valoran attacks. But, humanity's weapons were designed specifically to fight enemies like this. They didn't just damage matter, they unmade it, tearing apart the fundamental forces that held reality together. The battle lasted 4 hours. It was brutal, terrifying, and absolute. The Devourers adapted quickly, learning from each attack and adjusting their defenses. But, the humans adapted faster. They switched tactics constantly, never giving the enemy time to fully counter their methods. They used weapons in combinations the Devourers had never encountered, creating cascading failures in the mechanical vessel systems. When it was over, the 3 Devourer ships were nothing but expanding clouds of ionized particles. The human vessels had taken damage, their shields depleted and their hulls scored with impact marks. But, they had won. The Valoran fleet watched in stunned silence as the human ships powered down their weapons and began rescue operations, searching for Valoran survivors from the destroyed battle groups. They had come as promised. They had fought as promised. They had saved Valoran lives without hesitation, even though the alliance was still new and trust was still being built. Aboard the Silence of Terra, Chief Engineer Yuna was already working on repairs. Commander, we're going to need a week in dock to fix all this damage. The Devourers hit us harder than anything we've faced before. Hyun nodded. That's fine. We proved our point. The Devourers can be beaten, but it takes everything we have. That's why we need allies. No single species can fight them alone, no matter how powerful. 6 months later, a joint human-Valoran station was completed at the border of explored space. It was massive, larger than any structure either civilization had built before. It served as a military base, a diplomatic center, a research station, and a symbol of cooperation between 2 very different species. Young Officer Miho stood in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. Beside him was Kalseth, the Valoran sensor operator who had first detected the silence of Terra all those months ago. They had become friends during the cultural exchange program, learning each other's languages and cultures. When I first saw your ship, Kalseth said quietly, I thought it was death coming for us. I thought you would destroy the coalition and enslave my people. Miho nodded. I understand. We look dangerous because we are dangerous. Humans have learned that the galaxy respects strength. But, we've also learned that strength without wisdom is just destruction. Your species has a saying, Kalseth said. Walk softly and carry a big stick. I looked it up. It means to be peaceful but prepared for war. Exactly, Miho said. We bring the stick. We bring the most powerful ships, the deadliest weapons, the willingness to fight when we must. But, we'd rather walk together. We'd rather build together. We'd rather face the darkness as friends instead of enemies. Outside the viewport, the silence of Terra hung in orbit, its massive form silhouetted against the stars. Near it were 3 Valoran battleships, now equipped with upgraded shields based on human technology. Human and Valoran crews worked side by side on both types of vessels, learning from each other, growing stronger together. In the distance, deeper in space, long-range sensors continued their eternal watch. The Devourers were still out there, and there would be other threats, other challenges. But, for the first time, 2 civilizations were facing those threats together. Not as conqueror and conquered, but as true allies. Commander Hyun had once said that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their weapons or their technology. It was their ability to learn from their mistakes and choose peace when they could choose war. Standing in that observation deck, watching 2 species work together to build something greater than either could achieve alone, Miho understood what his commander had meant. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, and full of darkness. But it was also full of possibilities, of chances to forge new friendships and build new alliances. Humanity had learned that lesson the hard way, through blood and sacrifice and countless mistakes. Now they were sharing that lesson with others, proving that strength didn't have to mean domination, that power could be used to protect instead of conquer. And, in the void, silent and watchful, the Titan-class warships maintained their eternal vigil over the stars, ready to defend those who couldn't defend themselves, ready to fight the darkness wherever it appeared. They were humanity's promise to the galaxy: we are here, we are strong, and we will stand between the innocent and the void. Not as conquerors, but as guardians. Not as masters, but as friends.